Hello, my name is Faith Parker, and I'm here to talk about my grandfather, John Arthur Potter, who served in the U.S. Army in World War I. He was born in Prescott, England in 1897, October 23rd, 1897, and emigrated to this country in the early 1900s with his mother. His father had already emigrated and was establishing himself as an upholsterer in New York City and sent for his wife and son once he got himself established. He enlisted in the National Guard and was subsequently drafted into the Army in 1917. He enlisted under the name Arthur Haynes. His parents had separated at some point in his childhood, and he'd gone to live with his mother, and he'd always used the name Arthur, and she used her maiden name Haynes, and so that was the name he enlisted under. He was sent to Spartanburg, North Carolina, Camp Wadsworth, along with the 107th Infantry out of New York, and he stayed there for the entirety of his service. He never actually saw action. He was discharged in January of 1919. It's a little unclear to me from the paperwork whether or not he had had some sort of injury. One of the forms says that there was a surgeon's note. Another one says he was in good physical condition, so I'm not quite sure what that was all about. Where his story really gets interesting is not so much about World War I per se, but when we got to be around the time of World War II, he became interested in participating in civil defense. He was very patriotic. He loved this country. I remember when I was a kid, he always drove a big, like a Lincoln Town car that had an America Love It or Leave It sticker on it. But he was very, very patriotic. And they wouldn't let him initially join the civil defense because they said he was not an American citizen. They could not find any record of Arthur, or of him as an American citizen. And this was because of the name switch. And so because of that, he did a huge amount of research gathering all of his records, which means I have all of his records about his enlistment and his discharge and his transfer to the Army and to Spartanburg. I also have a scrapbook that it looks like my grandmother put together. They would have been dating at the time that he was enlisted. I'm not sure if it's something she sent to him or if it's something that she kept just as a sort of, to constantly remind herself of what was going on, but it's filled with newspaper articles and cartoons and pictures and, a lot of really interesting stuff about World War I that's sort of very evocative of what the culture was like in America, during 1917 and 1918. Yeah, so I don't know a lot about his early life. The military papers say that he was employed as an inspector prior to the war, but I don't know what he was inspecting. I mean, he would have been very young. He would have been, because he was 20 when he joined the National Guard. After the war, he was employed by the telephone company, Ma Bell, and worked for them for the rest of his life. I think in some sort of administrative or business capacity. I don't think he was out, climbing telephone poles, but he worked for the telephone company. He was Grandpa. He was, this lovely, charming man who, showed up for birthdays and Christmas, and that we went to visit every once in a while, and
Where was this?
I grew up in upstate New York, and they lived in Westchester, so it was we were about 3-4 hours north of them, so we didn't get to see them every weekend kind of thing,
Yeah.
but a few times a year.
And how old was he when he died?
He was 71 when he died. 71 now, he would have been, not 71, he was born in 97, he would have been 73 or 74 when he died. So my grandmother at the time was a student at the Savage School of Physical Education, which was a sort of a junior college in New York City at the time. It was either an all-girls school, I think it may have had an affiliated men's college, but her particular place was all women. Somewhere I have her yearbook from there, and it's a hoot to go through. David Willard Howe, this is now on my father's side of the family, served in France in the 13th Pursuit Squadron, and because his younger brother was an historian, his younger brother George wrote this booklet about it, and transcribed letters home, and I haven't read this in years, but it's got some interesting things.
And did you know him?
I did. He passed away when I was 8 or 9 years old.
Okay.
He was born in Burlington, Vermont. He was the oldest son of Willard B. Howe and Annie Howe Bean Howe. Sort of a very complicated set of marriages and cousins and relationships there. And Willard B. Howe was a businessman in Burlington. He started the Burlington Free Press, and my great-uncle David sort of took over the helm of that and was editor of the Free Press for his entire post-war career.
Uh-huh.